Thank you all for joining us today. We're going to have a luncheon panel discussion about conservative criminal justice reform. And my name is Vikrant Reddy. I'm a senior policy analyst at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, which is a think tank located down in Austin. I am really excited to be here today. I want to extend a personal thank you to Eric Erickson for holding this event in Fort Worth. This is my hometown. This is where I grew up. It's really neat to see an event like this hosted here in Fort Worth. And I'm joined here today by former State Representative Jerry Madden. Jerry, why don't you introduce yourself?
And I'm Jerry Madden. I was born in Iowa. I have a daughter who actually lives in Tulsa, Oklahoma right now. But I served, graduated from the United States Military Academy at West Point. Served in Vietnam. Spent a lot of years as an engineer. That's my background, is engineering. I was elected in 1993 to the Texas legislature and served 20 years. During that time, and for 8 of those years, I was on the Corrections Committee, 6 of them as the chairman of Corrections. And since that time, I've joined the Right on Crime effort as their senior fellow and do a lot of speaking around the country, talking to them about the criminal justice reform that we have done in Texas.
All right. Well, let's just have a conversation. This is just going to be a dialogue between the two of us. But we're not the first ones to talk about criminal justice at RedState. Yesterday, a lot of people in this room saw that Governor Perry was standing up at this stage, and he started talking about Texas's great successes in criminal justice reform. He mentioned that this state has the lowest crime rate it's had since 1968. He mentioned that the state has actually been closing down prisons rather than opening them up. And then he pointed at you. You were sitting at that table, and he said, "Isn't that right, Jerry?" Why did he point at you? What did you do?
Well, at the time, I was chairman of corrections. I'm not a lawyer. I have never been involved in criminal justice things in the past, and I've never been on a corrections committee. And in January of 2005, our very conservative speaker, Tom Craddock, calls me into his office and he says, "Jerry, you're going to be chairman of corrections." And of course, you do what you always do to the speaker. You say, "Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I really appreciate this opportunity." And under my own breath, I'm saying, "Oh God, why me? What did I do to deserve this?" But I then asked what was the second most important question that I've ever asked in my life. I said, "Mr. Speaker, what do you want me to do?" And he gave me the 8 words that changed my life. He said, "Don't build new prisons. They cost too much." Now, that's a conservative message. What does it mean? Well, I didn't know at the time, so I said, well, I better start figuring it out. How many people do we have in prison in the state of Texas? Well, we had 150,000. And by the way, when I ask a question to you guys, if you want to answer, the answer is probably going to be a lot. How many prisoners did we have? A lot. How many people were on probation in the state of Texas? There you go. How many people were on parole? A lot. We had 400 and some thousand people that are on probation in the state of Texas. 170,000 of those are on felony probation. That means that they did a felony, but that the judge decided that instead of sending them to prison, they were going to give them another opportunity within their community. We have 78,000 roughly people that were on parole. We had over 650,000 people that were incarcerated by the state, and that didn't even include county jails or any of the federal facilities when you're talking about immigration or anything. That didn't count any of those either. It was 650,000 people. Well, what do you do with that? Because my speaker has told me, don't build new prisons. And you look at the forecasts at that time, and they were all going to be, gee, there's going to be a lot more people coming to prison. A lot more. How many? A lot. They said at the time it was going to be about 15,000. We got a forecast in January 2007 that said it was going to be 17,700 more people coming to prison. Well, in the legislature, we had to deal with a thing that we had, the William Wayne Justice had told us not to overcrowd prisons. We've been under federal control or judicial control of our prisons for quite some time, and we didn't want to go there. We'd just gotten out from under that. So the choice was not be for these 17,000 plus people coming in to stick them back and jam them more into these prisons. Just couldn't do that. So, here's a Texan, here's a conservative thinking, well, what do I do? Because I've been told, don't build any more of those things. I can't build any more of those building blocks called prisons. I can't expand them. What can I do? And you really had only two choices, guys. You had open the door and let them out, or you had a way to figure out slowing them down coming in. Well, which one do you think of those is not going to work in Texas? Open the door and let them out. That was not a conservative approach to doing criminal justice. So we started looking at, well, how do they get to prison? How do people get there? And we had a lot of good people that came in and told us some great ideas, but we found out that there were quite a few thousand who got there because of what they call technical revocations of probation. That means they didn't show up, or they were, high on drugs when they showed up, or they got the probation officers mad at them for a lot of reasons. There were technical revocations with 13,000 of them. Now, that doesn't mean they're all good guys, but that was not additional crimes. That was not a new crime that sent them in. That was just they didn't show up for what they were supposed to be doing, or they didn't, do what the probation department said they were supposed to do. So we started looking at probation. And I went across, I tried to figure out, well, who in the legislature knew anything about it?
Right.
And the answer was, no, it's not a lot. It's a few, a very few knew anything about it. That was not the specialties. If you notice, there's probably nobody other than Governor Perry who's come up here and talked about criminal justice stuff, because it was not, something that legislators love. It was not their favorite subject. It was one of those things they didn't demand that they be on that committee. So, right. But it's important. Why is it important? Because it's the third largest part of our budget. Third largest. After welfare and public education, it's the third largest part of our budget, and I subsequently found out it's probably the third largest part of almost every state budget out there. It's ahead of transportation. It's ahead of a lot of things. It's ahead of higher education in the way of spending. And you spend a lot of money on it. So I said, well, who else knows about it? And I found out from my Senate colleagues that there was a moderate Democrat. I won't call him a liberal. I call him a liberal lots of places. He really isn't. He's a moderate Democrat, which is just about as bad. But I found a friend over there who knew something about it, and his name was John Whitmire. And when we got together and started talking about, well, what do we do to meet my mission that I had? Because remember, West Pointer has a mission now. It's not to build new prisons. How do we do that? That he actually had a lot of ideas that we started to look at, all right? And by the way, he passed something that's way too liberal out of the Senate. We did that in the Texas Senate, and sent it over to our Texas House, and I told him right off the bat that some of those things weren't going to work, and we changed them and modified them, and we did that on probation the first year that we were there, because the probation people came to us with some wonderful ideas, good stuff like specialty courts and doing additional money for probation. Surprisingly, any agency comes to you and tells you.
What is a specialty court? You just used that phrase.
Specialty courts usually are those that deal with special issues. They be drug courts. We have a prostitution court in Dallas. We have mental health courts in the state. We have veterans courts in the state. And as they keep dreaming, they'll probably dream up some more, but that's the main ones. But we have a lot of drug courts because we have a lot of people who are in the criminal justice system because of drugs. So that's got us started. We started looking at that, and the governor vetoed that bill. Governor Perry vetoed the bill. And as I tell everybody, it was the best thing that ever happened to us, because we started then looking at the whole system that we had in the criminal justice and correction, particularly correction system. We didn't really look that much at the criminal justice side of it. We looked at the correction side of it and said, well, where do we break this cycle so that I can do something that says I'm slowing them down without endangering public safety? Because that was number one on our agenda, was we're not going to endanger public safety in anything we do. We're going to keep the public safe. How do we do that? We figured out that there are two types of people in prison. There were the ones we were afraid of and the ones we're mad at. Right? And there's about, of that 150,000 people we had in the Texas prisons, probably 70 to 95,000 of those were those we would be, quote, afraid of. And 50, 60,000 of them were the ones you'd call mad at. They're the ones that are stupid, that do really dumb things. They're the ones that use drugs or had certain drugs on them that, they just got themselves involved in stuff that, they did dumb decisions in their life. And so we did that. If you look at the probation side, the ones on probation, there's a lot more of the stupid and dumb And they don't put people that we're really afraid of very often on probation. And the ones that are on parole, those are the ones who are nearing their end of the sentence, and at least the state parole board has thought that they at least should be eligible for release and being watched. So we had those kinds of people. We started looking at, well, where do we break the cycle? And we decided somewhere along the line, I put together, I had think tanks coming in that started talking to us in Texas.
Like the Texas Public Policy Foundation?
Texas Public Policy Foundation, who I was just going to lead to, since one of your lovely leaders out here.
She is.
Brooke Rollins is here. And they started coming in with this young man named Mark Levin, who was there. He was their only criminal justice guy at the time. And comes in and had a bunch of ideas. And we had a more liberal think tank. But what I found out is when they started talking, if you threw out the extremes, there was 80% of the stuff they were saying was the same. It was identical. It was, do this is smart. So we started looking at, well, can we do smart things that will in fact be well received by conservatives, liberals, libertarians, moderates, whatever it would be, that would be well received by different groups. And we decided that, yeah, they would. So we put them in the room working on this probation bill that the governor had vetoed, because it had ideas in it that were good. Had specialty courts in it. It had additional funding ideas for probation departments. It had, shortening sometimes for some people on probation that had never done anything wrong on probation, and we were looking at them and how to monitor them. We had technology things that we're dealing with, so it had some good ideas in it. So we put them doing that. I had some other longtime staffers who've been around, both conservatives and liberals and moderate staffers, who knew at least the programs we had. Because one of the things that I'm about is saying, I want a program that works. Forget this funding of things that don't work. We do too much of that in government, all right? But we wanted to say, if there are programs that are working that reduce recidivism so that people don't come back to prison, or keep people from coming to prison so we don't fund them, all right? By the way, how much does it cost to fund a person in prison every day? A lot. There you go. How about $50 a day? That's what we spend. And by the way, we're cheap. There are a lot of states that spend a lot more than we do. All right? We're cheap. $20,000 a year for every person you send to prison in the state of Texas. All right? And you had those that were afraid of, yeah, I'll spend that $20,000 any year, any day, for the rapists and the murderers and the armed robbers and those. But, for somebody who had a small amount of a drug or did some other third-time DWIs, for example. I hate DWI guys because they're random killers, except if you break their habit and they're no longer drinking, then I'm not afraid of them. Okay, I'm afraid of drunk drivers who are driving on the highways because they're random killers. But if somebody's not drinking and has been off it for years, okay, they may be even sitting in this room today. They may be people who've had that problem in their life or had drug problems in their life. And how do you allow it so that they can, in fact, get what we would, as Christians, would call redemption? How can you get forgiveness for something that, I mean, how many of us would like to be known for the worst thing we ever did in our life? I don't think the answer is a lot. I think it's a lot. Very few of us would like to be known for the worst things we've ever done. But a lot of the people, that's what happened to them. The worst thing they ever did got them caught and got them sent into our prison system. So that got us started. And in 2007, when we started the big work, we had this forecast of 17,700 more prisoners. We had, by that time, developed alternatives that said, if you treat drug addicts, and if you provide intermediate sanctions for parole and probation officers, and if you expand the use of specialty courts, and if you treat the mentally ill and give them treatment early in their system, even when they come into the correction system in the counties, if you give them money so that they will treat them and it doesn't get worse, that works, that it does work, that the numbers clearly indicated, because we went back and we started using research-based, data-driven approaches, numbers, to this engineer that said, all right, this is going to work. All right? So we did that in 2007. We came up with this. The proposal I had was for 17,700 people. John Whitmire and I walked into Governor Perry's office at the start of that session, and we told him what we had. And to Governor Perry's credit, He said, go ahead, we'll look at what you got, because our projection said if we do what we're looking to do, we will not have 17,700 more prisoners show up in Texas. We will have a steady, maybe even a lowering prison population, and we would not make it any less safe, because we're keeping the bad guys. We're just making sure that we treat drug addicts so that maybe they're no longer going to be a drug addict. If you can increase the probability that they stop using drugs, or that they stop using alcohol, or that they stay on their medicines as a mental health person, that those things do actually work, that the numbers clearly indicated that that could work. We trusted and put those into the legislative thing. He said, all right, you got a chance. If you bungle it, we'll be back next time, next session, and we'll fix you up and fix what you did, but we're going to give you the shot. So we went and did those things in the budget.
What are the results?
The great thing are the results. All right? As Governor Perry pointed out, our crime rate has continued to dropped dramatically, more dramatically than most states in what we've done. And that's good, guys. We're safer. It's not that you're going to ever be totally safe. We lose liberty when you make everybody totally safe. You can't do that. But you can make everybody safer. We're safer. What has happened in the number of prisoners? We had to build 6,000 prison beds, guys. When we built the intermediate sanctions and the substance abuse treatment beds, we put in 6,000 new beds into the Texas prison system. I violated the charge that my speaker gave me of don't build new prisons. We put out 6,000 new beds for short-term utilization, because our district attorneys and our prosecutors and our defense attorneys had come to us and said, you know, we got a lot of people that need treatment, really do. And they should get it. But what's happening in our system up to then was, you know, they'd wait 6 or 8 months before they got there and sit there in jail, you know, and that didn't work. So we made it so that those things were available to them on a short-term basis. And what's happened on that prison population is the total prison population that we had, we are now at least 3,000, almost 4,000 people less than what we had before. And as Governor Perry pointed out, we closed 3 prisons. Now, how many prisons do we have? A lot, a lot. We have 111 at the time we started. We're down to 108. I will project that the legislature will be able to close at least 1 more of those when the next legislative session comes around. That still leaves us a lot, guys. But the number of people on parole, the parole revocations, when we started this in 2005, there were 22,000 people that were looked at by the parole board, and 11,000 of those who got paroled came back to prison. 11,000 of them. 50% of the parolees were being revoked. This last year, the parole board has taken a percentage of paroles, which was at 24%, and has gone up to granting 36% of the parole requests that they have. Now, that doesn't mean they're letting all of them out by any means. That means that there's 64% that aren't getting out. All right? But 36% is what they've gone up to. And the revocations we had last year were under 6,000. We were sending out 28,000, getting 6,000 coming back versus 22 and 11 when we started in this. The parole revocation rate is just down tremendously. We're getting the equivalent of at least 2 prisons not coming back each year, 2 prisons full each year from parolees not coming back. On the probation side, we have fewer people on probation now than we had in 2007. They're getting better treatment. Perfect? No, there's no such thing as a perfect system that's out there. But we did those things that have reduced the number of revocations, and we also touched juvenile justice at the same time, because we had a little bit of a problem. Anybody think that you're going to make somebody who you send to a juvenile state prison that gets raped by the warden, you think that this person's going to come out a better person? No, we didn't either. That's what we had going on in our juvenile system. We totally, under the governor's leadership, we totally reworked the Texas Youth Commission, totally changed what they were doing, said, you know, they were taking kids who had done graffiti work or had small amounts of drugs, misdemeanors, and we're sending them on to the Texas Youth Commission to lock them up so that we could send them out to places where they'd get raped by the warden. We didn't think that was a good idea. We took out all the misdemeanors and said to the counties, you keep the people in your community that are there for these lower level offenses. We'll take the bad guys. We'll take the rapists and the sex offenders and the murderers, and we still got some of them. But we took the juvenile population from 4,600 down to last month it was 1,200 kids that we had locked up. 1,200, okay? That's what we did. And we took and closed 6 juvenile facilities. And we saved over $100 million a year to the state taxpayers by doing that. That's the kind of stuff that we learned at that time in Texas we could do. Now I've answered that question of that's what we did.
Well,
and the results are just absolutely beyond our wildest expectations.
But Jerry, let's take a step back. You talk about these amazing policies, but good policies have to be rooted in fundamental principles. So what conservative, limited government principles were involved in all of this work?
Well, we went and looked specifically. Obviously, one of the things when the speaker tells me the prisons, they don't build new prisons, they cost too much. That's a conservative principle of government. What we did is we put the correctional system under the same scrutiny as we as conservatives would put every other system under. You know, we look at education. We should do a lot of things in education that we haven't done, that our scrutiny has led us to the point where we haven't finished those. We looked at things in transportation that we want. We want effective and efficient things that are done right and done that are actually principles that our government should do. I think there's no one in this audience that wouldn't say that housing dangerous criminals is an official function of government. We have to do that. So we wanted to make sure we had them in there. But on the other hand, we wanted to look at that population and say, is there a difference that can be made with some of the others so that they, will in fact become not tax burdens on you at $20,000 a year, but working taxpayers going back into their community. What happens when we take a father out of a family and send him to jail? Okay, and let's not say what he did. That doesn't matter there. What we automatically do probably to that family is put them in poverty. And guess what that puts you in? It puts you into your poverty systems with additional expenditures. If we can do things, there are some of these guys and gals that don't do things that are to the level of things that we say we're afraid of, or we're just mad at him, you did something really stupid, okay? That in fact, if we can change them and keep them in the community as taxpayers, as those who will in fact work in their community and be good parents to their family. I mean, how many broken families do we have? And we break them in some cases by sending them, into the criminal justice system, where, it's just spending money that we shouldn't be doing. So it's basically a core set of conservative principles that deal with liberty and also deal with expenditures and deal with how we handle the budget, how we should run a government.
Sure. Well, I think the point you make about family breakdown and breakdown in neighborhoods is real important. The fiscal case is kind of obvious. They cost so much money, but groups like Prison Fellowship and Chuck Colson, they've been so prescient about explaining how communities and families just deteriorate whenever you put people in prison. Now, some people belong there. You and I both know that.
Yep.
But when you've got low-level, nonviolent offenders who are being locked up for years and years and years, you've just set that family on an awful track.
You have definitely done that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
There's no doubt.
But so we got going, and what's happened since that time, I think it's important we point out, is the major step that happened off of what we did is that Texas Public Policy Foundation started looking at, what we'd done, and they were getting calls from all over the country saying, well, Texas did these things, and you're talking about all these things that Texas did. What else can you do? What different things can we do? And that's what's led to this movement, which we now call Right on Crime, and setting it up so that, in fact, we're going national and telling all of the states and the federal government what we did at Texas and how they can become involved and how they can, in fact, do the same things. We put out a statement of principles. It's, in fact, in everybody's packet. They can find it. And if you'll notice on there, we have signatories, people who agree with what we've said in that, because our principles, the major four, in deal with how do we deal with victims of crime and making sure we have wise utilization of our money and doing smart public policies. And you can keep going with me on that one, Vikrant, if you want to. But basically a set of principles. I think if you all read them, you'd say amen to almost all of that. If you don't say amen to 100%, I'll bet you get 90. And as a legislator, I always took 90% as being fine. that you should be, you'd be agreeing with us. It says these are smart things to do. We as conservatives ought to be doing that. Well, who do we have as signatures?
Yeah, let's talk about.
You want to list a few of them?
Well, I mean, we've got Newt Gingrich, we've got Grover Norquist, we've got Ed Meese, J.C. Watts. We have. I mean, these
How
are.
about Eric Erickson?
Eric Erickson, of course, is one of our most recent ones. Yeah, right here at RedState.
How about Ken Cuccinelli?
Ken Cuccinelli, who spoke yesterday, is a signatory to the Statement of Principles. These are people that no human being could possibly call soft on crime.
Absolutely
It's just insane to call Ed Meese soft on crime, for goodness sake.
I don't think anybody called Ken Cuccinelli soft on crime.
I don't think anybody would say that about Ken Cuccinelli. There's no doubt.
We're not. It's not. It's not a thing that says soft. It says smart. What utilization of our ideas and our funds in a smart way, and saying that same thing to other state legislators, because we've then gone around to talk around the state. And Vikrant said, well, just tell your travel schedule from the last year or so as to where we've been and where we've done stuff. But I think we ought to state that there are states who have done similar things to what we did in Texas. One of those is Georgia. Georgia passed major criminal justice reform in their system. Right. When I mention a state, stand up. Because Georgia did it. Jay Neal was a great friend of mine and the legislator who did that. And you've got some great senators who have also worked on that. But they brought in, I think they've had 7 different bills in adult and juvenile corrections. You know what, guys? In all but one of those bills, they passed the legislature doing major reform in their system unanimously. How many of you think that there are unanimous votes on anything in state legislatures? Well, they might be to adjourn or something like that, but that's about where you'll get unanimity from. They've done that. Alaska, and I know there's nobody here from Alaska, right? All right, good. Alaska just passed major reform this last year that they did, and they did it unanimously in their legislature. In fact, on the House floor, they had representatives fighting over who would be the author of the bill. Okay? What other states have done stuff? Well, you heard from the governor of South Carolina. South Carolina is a major leader in what we've done in criminal justice reforms in the states. North Carolina is another. In North Carolina, we started out dealing with a Democratic legislator who was the starting point with their reform. And somewhere along the line, and about a year later, the legislature changed hands from Democratic to Republican hands. And yet, we continued that same approach, but with a different sponsor for the bill, a very conservative Republican friend of mine, who also passed the major legislation in North Carolina with a substantial majority. I don't think he got a complete unanimous vote, but he got very close. We've had other states that have done stuff. Just recently, Mississippi passed major criminal justice reform. With the help of their governor and with the calls from Governor Perry to their governor telling them what great work these items do in changing your budgets, Governor, so that you have more funds available to do something else, whether that be tax reductions or transportation or whatever your colleagues and your friends in the legislature would think to do with the money, but you have more, that you don't spend it on corrections. Their bill, they indicated, would save $270-some million, I think was the figure, over the next few years. We saved, Texas's savings, in the 2 years we did it, was $2 billion. Figure this, building prisons to hold 17,700 prisoners would have taken at least 8 prisons at basically $200 to $250 million each, and would have cost $40 million a year to run. That's what it cost in Texas. We kept from doing that. We saved our taxpayers the largest amount by any amount of any state, but of course Texas is the largest, and we expect to be number one on just about everything we do, and we were definitely on this, okay? So we did the work very, very well on that, but other states have done stuff. Kentucky, Ohio's done some sweeping reforms. Recently, South Dakota did theirs. There are other states working on it now, Alabama and Nebraska and Utah and Idaho just did theirs. No,
well, I want to cut you off because there's something conspicuous about the list of states you're rattling off there. They are almost to a T red states. Texas, Mississippi, South Carolina, North Carolina, Alaska. And I'm wondering What is holding back the liberal states? Why can't California move forward? Why can't Illinois move forward? Why can't liberals take leadership on this issue?
The liberals have had a problem over the years that they've, as you all know, okay, that's an understatement. But in criminal justice, they've had a problem that they've been all about the criminals and doing stuff for the criminals. That's where we took the change and said, oh yeah, we're going to deal something with those, but our interest is in public safety and in victims of crime and in dealing with specifically changing the attitude and the actions, not trying to feel soft or feel bad about them, but feeling that what we're doing is smart things that are changing the way they act. And then they have another couple of problems in places like California and Illinois. He knows my Illinois line's coming. But the California people, they're all about labor unions.
Right.
Guys, they have labor unions in California who are really smart. The corrections unions are really smart. You know what they do? They donate money to both sides, or they donate to who they're pretty sure is going to be the winning candidate. There are conservatives, probably friends, probably Tea Party people, who probably in California have received funding from the prison unions. Guys, that's one of the biggest problems that fortunately in Texas, we have some great workers in the prisons, but we don't have strong unions that are there. We can do a lot of stuff because of that. And some of the states have to deal with what they have there. The other thing is in Illinois, they have a large population of former governors that are incarcerated in the state. And they have to provide good facilities for their former governors. And also they're a very liberal state that thinks that they can tax all their way out of things, and so that they're just about raising taxes. Ours was about how do we smartly use the taxpayers' money in such a way that we don't waste it, but that we in fact use it in an intelligent way to smartly do the things in the correction side. And that's what we did.
Well, there's a question I think hovering over this entire conversation.
Okay.
It's drugs.
Yep.
What is the difference between drug legalization and drug decriminalization? And why don't you explain Right on Crime's position on those issues?
Right on Crime has a simple position. We don't take a position on either decriminalization and or legalization. I personally don't favor legalization. And on the decriminalization side, I'm not for decriminalization, but I am for looking at smart sentencing. For example, we had stuff we were looking on in Louisiana where on their third time possession of small amounts of marijuana, small amounts, third time, that they could be sent for 20 years to prison. How many of you think we ought to spend $400,000 because somebody has a small amount of marijuana on them? Because that's what a 20-year sentence would cost in Texas. We didn't think that was smart. But the great thing about Texas is we didn't touch sentencing. So if somebody says to you, well, this is all about reducing sentences, it's not. We didn't change a single sentence except I did one in the juvenile bill. I made it a higher crime if somebody raped a kid in a state facility. Okay? I increased the penalty on that. And you know what? It was not ex post facto, so it didn't get the fire guys, and we hadn't had a single one convicted on it since then, because we changed it and got rid of a lot of those people that were in that system. By cutting back the 6 facilities, we saved a whole lot of money, and we have a lot fewer people working in that, and they're wonderful people that we have dealing with those in the communities most of the time. Doesn't mean that they're all perfect by any means.
Sure. Well, when I arrived in Fort Worth a few days ago, first day of the RedState Convention, I noticed that the lead story in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram was about this court that they're developing that's modeled off the Hope Court in Hawaii. I think it's fascinating and would love to hear you talk about the Hope Court model and what Hope is.
Sure. Hope was the Hawaiian model developed by a gentleman named Judge Stephen Alms. I don't have any idea. Probably in Hawaii, I think they're all Democrats, but I don't think they elect. I think he's position. I'm not sure how he's got there. But Judge Alms came up with the idea of swift and certain sanctions. Swift and certain. Think about that. Think about right now what happens in your community, in your state. If somebody gets arrested for a small amount of drugs, okay, or and have been put on probation, and they get a dirty urinalysis, what happens to them? Not much. Not much first time, probably nothing. Probably they get told, stop doing that. Second offense, probably they don't get anything either. What Judge Alm did is he set up a group that consisted of the prosecutors, the treatment people, the defense counsels, his own staff, and said, if you get a dirty, if you're sent to my court, if you're one of my people that had an offense, you did a drug offense, okay, and you're sent to my court, you're going to fit into this category. If you violate, something's going to happen to you immediately. You come in today and you have a dirty urinalysis, you're going to jail today, tonight. Forget your plans for tonight. You're going to spend 24 hours in jail. Right? You do it a second time, guys, you're going to be there a week. You do it a third time, you'll be there a month. What has happened with Judge Alm's court? He has drug offenders. They're almost all drug offenses that he has. 50% of them, he has a pretty good sized group, by the way, each time. 50% of them don't ever violate one time. They don't ever miss an appointment. They don't have a dirty urinalysis. They don't do any other violations. They don't do another crime. They're clean. 50% of them. And these are druggies, all right? Of those that get the first time, he whaps them the first time. You walk in, and Vikrant's been doing something he shouldn't have been doing, and I whap him behind bars for 24 hours or overnight. He can't go home. You know how many of them violate the second time? Only 50% of those that did it the first time. He's down to 25% who have violated more than once. Of those that violate the second time, 50% of them don't violate the third. And he drives it in that 50% thing down to about 1.5%, 1.25%, 2%, somewhere in that range, of people who are the habitual addicts. The rest of them he breaks. He breaks their habit. That's what you really want to do, okay, is you want to break the habit. And so that's how the Hope Court works that way. They've expanded now so that they're doing similar courts around the nation, like here in Fort Worth.
What's notable to me about everything you've been saying is that, in my mind, this sounds tough on crime. You know, I think if you take somebody and say, go sit in this box, watch TV, and hang out, that's not really tough on crime. We were led for decades to think that's tough. What's tough is telling people, you're getting locked up immediately. If you have a drug problem, you're getting treatment.
Yeah.
If you have victims, you're paying restitution to them. You're going to earn for your family. That is tough on crime to me.
Well, and we also found people who come into the system who said, send me to jail. I want to spend my time. I don't want to go through probation. I don't want to go through any of these drug treatment programs. I don't want to do that. Yeah. That's some things, guys, we got to stop. We got to say to them, it's for our benefit as a community. We will be better off if you have a drug treatment program which keeps you from coming back. That's tough on you, but it's the right thing for us, the community, to have to cut down crime, because that's where we've driven it. We're cutting down on the number of people that are doing additional crimes at second, third, fourth time around.
Yeah, Newt Gingrich wrote something once where he said, if 50% of the government's bridges collapsed after they were built, we would say that the government's bridge building program has failed. Well, if 50% of the offenders who are being released in certain states are just reoffending, that government program has failed.
That's absolutely what we're saying around the country. And we're saying that to the federal system, by the way, too, guys. And they need to hear the same lesson.
Sure. Well, you know, the way that the laboratories of democracy are supposed to work is that we should learn from one another. Right. The federal government should be learning from the things we've done here in Texas and that have happened in Georgia and places like that.
Well, the good part of it is, if you look up there, there are legislators. Mike Lee is one that's presented ideas. Rand Paul has. John Cornyn has major legislation that are dealing with how we did things in Texas and specifically trying to put them into the federal law when it deals with programmatic utilization, with reducing recidivism, with handling the mentally ill, that they're trying to do the same things too, because we spend a lot of money on a federal system. They got 218,000 prisoners. Texas has 150,000. We're the system that's closest in size to the federals. So we give them pretty good idea of what they can do if they try, because their numbers, and they're building prisons like going out of style, and they're continuing to grow a prison population. whereas we've stopped growing it and in fact are reducing it.
You know, speaking of these people at the federal level who are doing such great work, I think last week Paul Ryan released this extraordinary anti-poverty plan. Chapter 4 of that plan is all about criminal justice reform.
Yes.
It's about reentry. It's about getting substance abuse treatment for people. It's really worth reading.
There are many conservative legislators in the House and of course in the Senate that are both moving toward that direction. It's one of those things that there are, by the way, a lot of liberal sign-ons, people that have signed on with them. There are some that are trying to force to do things that they shouldn't be doing. For example, okay, in the federal system, we should be doing all of these changes that the federals are doing by changes in the Congress and by passing laws in the Congress, not by presidential edict. You shouldn't be doing that. Some of the things he's talking about doing should not be done. We should not change releases and mechanisms of release unless the legislature says to do that. That's what we told Governor Perry to do, some of those things. And to his credit, he's done some of those things most of those things. In fact, you got to have good implementation. And to the credit of the state government of Texas, they did a wonderful job of implementing the programmatic things that we needed.
Well, before we go to Q&A, let's leave everybody with an action item. What can the people in this room do when they leave today to further progress in criminal justice reform?
Well, I think they should talk to their legislators and tell them to go look at the recommendations that Right on Crime and others, but particularly Right on Crime, have made on things that are smart in looking at things like overcriminalization, and looking at things like sentencing and sentencing changes that might be smart. Let them look at it. Tell them to go talk about it. It is now a subject that conservatives can talk about and can intelligently talk about with anybody else that's out there. And in fact, there are good ideas that conservatives have on the issue. So I think they ought to go tell their people to start looking particularly at Right on Crime and its great work.
Oh, sure. And, you know, I think Grover Norquist always says when he talks about these issues, not only that conservatives can lead, but they have to lead, because the liberals have just abandoned all credibility on the issue. Mm-hmm. The way they've talked about it for 30 years, as you pointed out, the way they've ignored victims and focused more on offenders has just damaged their credibility deeply. We're kind of obligated to take up the issue.
They have had the real problems in the last couple, 3 years as we moved this issue forward. And they've been basically in the Me Too attitude of, well, you know, they will agree with most of they're doing. They want to go a lot farther than we want and would do, and we should not go there. But we should continue the smart process of what we're doing.
Right. Well, we could turn to Q&A now. About 5 minutes ago, somebody gestured to me that it's question time, so I say we just dig right into it.
Sure.
Yes, thank you. That was very interesting. Given that most of the judges are old men like you and me, I would like your opinion on what how successful a program of teen courts have been, and how widely they are used in Texas and other states.
They're used fairly substantially in various areas. How successful? I've never looked at. I don't think I've ever seen numbers on teen courts and on what recidivism or what numbers come back. I've heard good reports about them. I have a JP in Collin County named John Payton who's done a remarkably good job with his teen court over the years, but I don't know. And so that's a great question that we need to find out.
It is. You know, I was a teen court attorney here in Fort Worth when I was at Fossil Ridge High School about 15 years ago. I don't know if you knew that. It was a good experience for me. I don't know about
He's the attorney.
For the offenders. Yeah. Eric, can we take one more question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great.
Hi, Jerry. I'm from Midland, Texas. My name's Cassandra. It is a pleasure to hear about all the work you've done. Really exciting. And I think this is how you sell liberty, what you're doing right now in the court system. Very exciting. My question is, how much does a generally good and robust economy contribute to a decline in crime?
It actually didn't affect us one way or the other. When the economy tanked, you said, boy, it's going to get worse and we're going to have more. We didn't. Now, whether it was our programs that were doing it and kept that from happening, or whether it was other changes that were out there in the society, I think it's a combination of all of them. I mean, we're keeping the really bad guys for a long time, and we should do that. And maybe that's a play on it. There's a lot of things going on. I asked the question, what's causing the crime rate to continue to drop all the time? One of the things you got to answer is there's technology that's doing some of that. Better policing, I think, is doing some of that. Keeping people longer, the bad guys, is helping. So all of those add together. But surprisingly, wasn't the bad economy that really drove anything that we saw in numbers. So,
no. Well, I think that's one area in which liberals were so flawed. The argument was always, well, you know, it's all poverty, it's all racism that causes all of these things, and so we have to solve those problems before we get to crime. But the thing is, in 2008, the economy collapsed, and everybody assumed, okay, well, now crime's going to go up, but it didn't. So I think you can fairly say that the conservatives won that argument about what causes crime. At the end of the day, it's about individuals and choices individuals make.
What's your thought on this push to have felons get the vote?
Yes,
I didn't understand the question.
You know, they're pushing, I think the libs are pushing to let felons get the vote. You know, they're not allowed to vote once they get out of prison, but now they want to let them vote.
Felon voting. Well, it's not an issue that Right on Crime gets into. I know Rand Paul has been talking a lot about it on the stump. It's just not something that Right on Crime is involved in. There are a lot of issues. This is one of them. The death penalty is another one that really kind of, I would say, tear apart conservatives. You know, there are people on all sides of these matters, and it's been hard to develop consensus. So we want to focus on the things where we know conservatives have strong consensus. And I think the overarching area where we have real consensus is that when you've got low-level nonviolent offenders, incarceration is not the best way to handle them. Treatment, rehabilitation, community supervision, cheaper and more effective. Let's keep our eye on that ball. And so that's what we focused on. That's a real important issue, though, and I would recommend the really interesting things that Senator Paul has been saying about it.
All right.
We'll give you the last question.
Cool. My question is, what has been done since the Right on Crime has been going on to really get buy-in from local county attorneys and local DAs? A lot of the time, these prosecutors like to run for re-election based on how tough they are. Right. And, you know, I live in Austin, and just north of us, we have Williamson County, which has a notoriously sadistic district attorney's office that is currently trying to...
He is not one of my favorites either.
Well, it's now a she, but she's just as bad. But exactly, you know, you have places like Williamson County where they try to lock people up for life over a couple of pot brownies, and what is being done and what can be done to continue getting buy-in on this stuff from local county attorneys and DAs?
You want to take that, or you want me to?
Well, that's a tough one, so I'm going to give it to you.
Okay, I'll take it. First of all, we do have a lot of district attorneys who we've worked with over the years, and they do have some of them with buy-in. You know, when you have 254 counties in Texas, and I don't know the number of district attorneys, but I think it's 120 some. Will you get a buy-in from every one of them? Unfortunately, no. They're all different, and they all. I think you should demand when they run that they don't run on convictions, but that they run on justice. And one thing we ought to talk about is justice. Is justice done in their districts? I would say somebody who sends somebody away for life for cooking brownies. I don't want them cooking marijuana-filled brownies. I'm not sure I want the citizens of Texas to pay $20,000 a year for 50 years to lock that guy up, okay? I think that there are changes that you should do in him and change the way he's thinking so that doesn't happen. So can you work with the DAs? We do have a lot of DAs around the country who do come in and help. We have some, as we have some attorney generals and former attorney generals who have signed on. As we talk about Ken Cuccinelli, and we have Hal Stratton out of New Mexico as one of our signatories. So we do have a lot of those who you would say are the tougher law and order type people who actually very much go along with us. And I think they're learning. There's another thing that we did. We did a cite and release bill back in 2007, which a lot of counties haven't done. If you're a good watchdog of your local budgets and your local community actions, and they come up and say, we got to build a new jail, okay? Make sure that they're using cite and release, because that basically would reduce the number of people, in my opinion, that they would be having in their jail at any one time. So there's different things you can do. I know that's not a really great answer to you.
Well, I want to offer one last thing before Eric pulls the long cane out. I think RedState was more or less founded on the idea that elected officials will respond to the pressure from the grassroots. So if the people in this room care about these issues, you have to put pressure on people who are running for office. That doesn't just mean the guy running for president or senator. It means local officials.
It means district attorneys.
It means DAs. So I think the more people like you, Adam, and people in this audience put that kind of pressure on people running for DA, the better results we'll get.
Folks, as they're leaving the stage, I want to say RedState signed on, and I personally signed on to the Right on Crime agenda, having been a lawyer for a number of years and also doing a lot of indigent criminal defense. I was astounded as one of those hard on crime, lock them all away people, just how absurd it is, the level of criminalization and business regulations and so many things that shouldn't put people away for years in jail. And frankly, in a lot of cases, people who very much need help, who instead of getting help are being thrown in jail forever. I encourage you to get involved and understand what Right on Crime is about, because you know, conservatives can take a tough stance on crime, but why are we putting good Americans away and ruining lives for things that you and we'd scratch our head over and say, this is just dumb. So.
Our overcriminalization is important to us, as Eric pointed out. One other thing that's there is we have both federal and state agencies that create criminal penalties within their rules and within their process that they have. That needs to be stopped. That is a bad thing to be doing. It should be the legislature, the Congress, that passes the criminal laws, not letting them lazily send that on to a state agency who then creates a crime that you probably won't even have the slightest idea is on the books.
Right. Thank you guys very much.
Good.